chat.
Well, I'm happy to sit here and drink coffee.
Don't want to do this one, really.
So here it is, all this stuff. It came in one big tin can from California. It was amazing packing it all up, and it had to come out of its normal. It was mostly everything was in big boxes like this, and big, and I left all that stuff behind.
Yeah.
I probably left about, I don't know, many thousands of dollars worth of ATA cases, which are all built to purpose. So I gave them to other percussionists who had.
But you brought your goat toenails.
I got my goat toenails over there, and I
You
got
your steel sheet
yeah,
and your
yeah, I love it too. It's amazing. It's a bit of a chore to get it in and out of here, but everything else except for this and my 33-inch timpani or a 32-inch timpani, the Marta's timpani, just barely gets through the door if you put your shoulder to it, which is not recommended. And I don't want to ever do it again. I'll take the wheels off it next time, and I'll be able to move it in and out. But everything else can get in and out, and everything else that's in here has been little by little being moved onto wheels. Anything, even like these tray stands, they'll be on wheels. Everything will be on wheels, and then you can cope with a small space.
Yeah.
So, hiya.
Hello. I've known you for quite a while now.
Okay.
When did I meet you? In 2014 or 2015?
How long have I been here?
Yeah. How long when did we meet? That was like
really early
right
on.
then, yeah.
Really early on. I know I've been here for at least 13 years.
Yeah.
You know, if I close this window, it'll a little bit quieter.
All right, yeah.
I'm going to just quickly do that. Because I'm hearing construction guys out there. Just use my tool.
Steve, this one looks like my dog. Is there something you want to tell me?
About this? It looks pretty funky and ratty, doesn't it? Well.
What animal did it?
This is felt actually. It's just
Okay.
like this is very thick piano damper felt, and if you tear it in half, you get this real soft side on the inside. But this is, I bought this felt when I was a freshman in college, first year, 1968 maybe even earlier. So it's kind of old, and it's breaking down pretty quickly. This is smooth.
And yeah, all this time.
Yeah, this is. I can't remember when I did this. I had to build a soft beater for a big drum like this. This might even have been a big drum. Anyhow. So I just do whatever's close and you kludge it together. We make mallets out of all kinds of stuff. Old blankets, old socks.
Socks?
Yeah.
What are you making out of old socks?
Oh, the drumstick. Using
Okay.
it for, when you, whatever you have to do to get the gig done, get the.
Is there any particular brand of socks that's
No, it's more the color that it's important to me,
Okay.
I was really into Argyle.
Right?
Yeah, then I've learned that I was mispronouncing it all those years.
Right.
And I'm still now, I know, but I can't remember what the right word is.
You like an Argyle sock for a...
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like the look of it.
Okay.
Anyhow, anything else you want to know?
So many things.
Yeah, okay.
So I met you in about 2014, 2015, and I wrote about your visa struggles at the time.
That's right. Without you, I would not be here. You were very important. But we were already pals by then. Because I remember you from the first time I met you. I was playing with Hamish and Adam, and I think John in Oban, maybe it was?
Okay, yeah.
Some kind of like gig, and you popped up and were taking pictures and stuff. I said, who's that? And it's helping at you.
There we go. Oh, so we have here your rhythm theory one.
Yeah, the current syllabus is.
Pulse relational rhythm theory and practice. It sounds pretty complicated.
Well, it is if you're like it's PhD kind of language, but there's a reason for it. Without not trying to sound particularly intellectual, but at some point, it's important to be absolutely precise about this stuff. And so the things are written down clearly. And then after that, once you have an understanding of it, you can put it in a vernacular and talk about it the way you normally would talk about stuff.
Okay, so that's what this is.
So this is looking at it as technically as you can. And it's still the language I was learning as I go. This began in like my first iteration of teaching it at the conservatoire. And I was still just wrapping up my PhD then, so I was still being really technical. But even the PhD is too wordy, more wordy than it needs to be.
Yeah.
What I found out when I started teaching is that the words are really getting in the way, and what we really needed to was doing.
Okay.
You know, so and the way instead of like starting off with a whole bunch of technical theory about rhythm structure and how things fit together and all the pulse relational subdivision and all of that stuff. We just start doing it, and as we're doing it, I begin to define things over a span of about 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
So when you get to the point where you're looking at how things like contemporary practices work with complicated modern music and stuff. You're up to speed with the language and you know what we're talking about.
Okay. See if you talk that way, then people can see your face.
Oh, okay.
With
All right.
Like you're the hairdresser. Not been for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So who is this for?
Who
is rhythm theory for?
Well, it's for anybody who's a musician who wants to improve their performance in general and their confidence in rhythm situations. And because this is directed at a very broad spectrum of style, in this class is the only one at the RCS which is actually open to anybody at the RCS. So I typically would have a class that was about a third of classical musicians.
Yeah.
Terrible term, but you know what I mean. Guys that are looking to get jobs down the road playing repertoire and folk musicians who would be fine if they never saw anything written down as long as they lived. And for people that are jazz oriented, who have kind of their own ideas about that and a whole vernacular of their own. But what they all have to do is play music together in time. So the first
what
thing,
any musician
yeah, and it seems so obvious, but then we try to talk about it, not in terms of time, but we use a language of notation, of 17th century notation.
I mean, do you think that's a problem that musicians have? Is not?
Yes, I think
that's
it's a problem that we all have. It's one of the reasons that our music in the West is so, at least in what's the right word? In concerts, in our formal music, is so encumbered with this language that the language begins to limit what we can do and how we do it, because it's. Any composer today who's writing today will understand and be able to tell you that every time he writes a composition and writes it down for an orchestra or anybody else, he's inventing notation as he goes, because the notation that we use stopped evolving 300 years ago. And we do things routinely, even in folk music right now. Our ideas of rhythm structures are much more elaborate and sophisticated in terms of structure than what was going on with Vivaldi and Bach for that matter, and classical music up until the beginning of the 20th century. That's when things started breaking open, and that's when notation started falling apart.
Okay, so I mean, I've had a wee read through this. I mean, it is readable despite it is. But could you say? I mean, why do people need to? I think you're talking about people needing to feel the rhythm rather than necessarily noting. Is that the case?
This is a good point to bring in the big picture of how this works. The first problem that slows us down a lot and gets people confused is we sort of isolate the idea of the technical structure of what we're doing, the notation and the subdivision and all that, and we acknowledge the fact that we all want to feel the music, then that everybody, that's the reason we get involved in it in the first place, is it feels so great to be doing music. That's the reason we dance. Not because we're interested in dancing technique at that point, but because we're moved by something going on in real time. So that's the sensorial realm. That's what I mean when I say sensorial.
Okay.
How it feels. And we sort of acknowledge in formal education, when we're teaching music to people, that you have to feel it, and then we sort of put that off to the side, and nobody ever goes back to that. And my idea is that we have to be connected to that at every step.
Okay.
That's the end game. How does it feel? Okay, so understanding the relationship between what we do and how it makes the music feel and makes us feel making music is the part of the system of teaching and playing that is not well organized if it's even acknowledged.
Does it exist?
Yes, it exists. Well, we have to do it. Most of the time, people that are good at this and wind up making a move into a career of it, get to that state very, very easily. And then, and although I even know some teachers that have suggested to me that, well, at the end of the day, people either have it or they don't. They either have the groove or they don't. And I think in some cases, certainly there are people that are just naturals at anything. There are people that first time they can ride on a horse, they can jump a fence. Yeah. People that first time they pick up a baseball bat, they can hit a ball for 400 yards. And there are other people that get to that stage just out of sheer will because they practice and they get a great coach, and because they love it so much that they'll do the work. There's this whole panorama spectrum of how you get there. For a lot of people to be able to feel it, if they don't initially, they sort of get discouraged and they never really develop that sensitivity. I believe that if you practice things really accurately, you are training yourself to be able to feel it. Here's the kind of hierarchy of my system of thought.
Okay.
I think that there's kind of a three-level process to knowing playing, for example, to knowing something that you really want to play. Maybe it's you're a guitar player and you have a rhythm groove on a tune that you really want to be able to playing, and when you're playing it, you're going to be playing it on a stage, and you're not going to be counting out loud, you're not going to be reading notes, you're not going to be thinking anymore because you already know it. The knowing of it is a point at which your practice has become embodied. So we start, but to be able to practice it to the point where it becomes automatic and you never think about it, you have to practice consistently and accurately. Okay, this has to do with just how human beings navigate the world, and I'll get to that in a minute. But before you can practice it accurately, you have to have a clear understanding of what you're practicing and why. What is it that I need to practice? So when it comes down to, like we were just walking down the street and we were talking about subdividing pulse, 1, 2, 1, and we put in, and I explained it like dividing that into 2 bits, using your natural body, which already knows how to walk, okay? Good news, you don't have to buy a metronome. You're born with a better one. Yeah. Honest. And what people can sense and feel, nuances and slight variations in pulse and subdivision to an astonishing degree.
So do you think it's inherent then? Do you think people have this?
I think it's a survival mechanism.
Right.
It's just like our sense of touch. You probably know, you can tell when you pick up 2 pieces, the thinnest paper in the world, you can tell you've got 2 instead of just 1. Yeah. Well, you're talking about increments that are much smaller than your ruler. Yeah. But we do that with rhythm too. We can, especially if we're practicing consistently, we can recognize when we're absolutely locked, like that's a flam, okay? I missed it. Closer, not perfect. Getting there. Okay. You know, it's, we can sense and feel differences.
It's a sense then, do you think it's one of the 5, you know, could be an extra sense?
So so you're capable of sensing it, but it's very hard to get it into a practice structure where you can control it. You need to be able to talk about it, to practice it. So the first thing you're doing is understanding what the issue is, and you need a language for describing the situation so you can communicate with it. And we have a lot of trouble on that end because, as I said, the language that we inherited and try to use for music is borrowed from notation, and it's completely the wrong context.
So you've developed a language for that, is that correct? Yeah.
A consistent language, you know.
So you've taken something which is a natural feeling and you've found a way to make it. Right.
And I think in a subsequent discussion we can start going into that. But right now, it's important to understand that if you want to get to where you can avoid that habit of, see, I'm a percussionist, so I'm used to slamming. I was taught to play that way. And I really...
So is that you trying to make both hands hit your knees at the same time?
Exactly the same time.
And how do you know that they're not?
Well, when I get it right, you're not going to hear this. You're going to hear just tap. Okay. This is close enough for 99% of my practice in symphony orchestras, and it's going to get me as close as anybody else in the band. But if I'm recording with my sequencer into something like Logic, which can resolve pulse into roughly 16 times the resolution that we normally encounter in our culture, the computer can do that. I can't. If I can get within 4, it'll sound like 1. Anyway, understanding what it is, what you need to practice, or whether it's a particular motion or a piece of music or a whole song form.
How are you teaching people to do this? How are you teaching people to do this?
Well, we start by I was making a big mistake by trying to explain all this wordy stuff I'm inflicting on you right now. What I would teach them to do is start by walking, because we can already walk, and let that be our metronome, and then we just start subdividing time. Okay?
So subdividing your steps. Okay.
Because the context of music and rhythm is time. It's not notation. It's not the text on this book. It's not the notes on the page. That's code. We developed that, and it's good. I'm not saying that notation is not good. As far as I know, Western notation is probably the most sophisticated notation to us available, but it's far from consistent and far from perfect. And it implies lots of little dead ends in thinking that we've come to accept as natural that are not. I'll give you a quick example. We talk about if you take, let's call that a beat, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. As long as I'm just doing a string of them, you don't have a sense of pattern of this recycling as meter. But as soon as I go, even you can tell what the grouping is, right? Give me a number.
2.
2, 3. Because as soon as we hear any pattern repeated consistently twice in a row, part of your brain is already running it forward thinking, oh, it's going to do it again.
So aside from, you've got a PhD, you've got however many years of experience, but what you're saying is anybody can do this?
Yes, yes. This is something that you don't have to be a musician and go to college.
Yeah.
One of my most rewarding experiences happened about a year ago, just talking to a community group in St. Andrews with grandmas and 11-year-olds and people that just kind of had a loose day and it was a free thing to do, so they came along. And I basically ran my first rhythm theory class with this group of people that were not college students interested in music, and they kept up with the college students in terms of getting it.
In terms of, yeah.
Because we are all of us have certain things in common as the way we interpret the world. And one of them is an inordinately sophisticated sense of pattern.
Yeah, okay.
That's been, you could have to talk to people in some other fields of human behavior to get the real story on how we acquired pattern. But I think it was probably a survival mechanism.
Right.
Because if you look around, everything is in pattern. You can maybe, I don't know if you can see all these tambourines, series of circles, all the little brass tubes hanging from the wind chimes, all symmetrical in a pattern. Every step, every time you take 4 steps in a row, you're walking in a pattern. Even things that don't seem to be pattern, that we're familiar with, are pattern. Say, traffic. The way traffic sounds when you're walking down the street in a neighborhood that you're in all the time, it doesn't bother you at all, even though it's random. You don't think about the traffic. Where some of your brain knows that, well, if I twist my ankle and I fall into the curb, I could get hit by a bus. Yeah. But we don't worry about it because that's really out of your normal pattern. Yeah. And we don't even think about the traffic until we hear a siren or a bunch of loud motorcycle. Then it'll pay attention. Why is that? That is because once we establish a pattern, part of our cognitive thinking is releases its attention from that and puts that into a more sublimates deeper in your thought. And we're cool with it until there's a reason where we know we need to change our idea of that pattern. So if we hear, we're going to assume, okay, that's a groove, and it's just going to go do that until we hear something that makes us realize, oops, there's an odd bar or a big drum fill comes every 4th time, and that changes your idea of the pattern. But you're free to catch that the first time you hear it because you're already comfortable with the idea that the rate, the pulse, is going to continue at the same speed unless there's a reason to think it'll be different.
Taking us down to the
it's going to be about the same groove, the same logic, same volume, same intensity, until something tells us that, well, there's something more to that pattern. It will change. That makes it possible for us to get through life and through our day-to-day lives. Otherwise, we would be so overwhelmed with cognitive thinking that every time we saw a window in a building, we'd have to be sure that there were windows on other walls and stuff. We'd be constantly reassessing. But the pattern is everywhere, okay?
And rhythm is a pattern.
Rhythm is pattern. Yeah. But it's not. It's not pattern as you might imagine. I think most of us think of rhythm, especially people that have a formal education, default to this notation idea of rhythm. The way most of us have been taught rhythm structures and rhythm subdivision, using that language, looking at notes on a page. That gets us started before we ever have a chance to really think about it with a couple of bogus ideas. One is that rhythm is moving in a direction from left to right. Yep. the way we write it down. It's not. If you think about it, every time you listen to something that you really like, are you thinking of it moving across your consciousness in a direction? No, you're immersed in it.
Yeah.
You're, in fact, what you want to do is just release into it, and you start dancing in whatever direction, you know, it is. It's three-dimensional, okay? It has density, it has places where things happen at the same time and when they don't, and that comes in patterns too. And we get those patterns quickly sometimes. Sometimes they're more complicated, more sophisticated. But the idea is that that we are wired to get pattern right away. So that gives us.
Is that a radical idea, do you think?
No,
it's. I mean, in terms of in the context of where you work in that, is the fact that people are wired already? Is this
no, we rely on all. We're relying on this constantly, and at home with it, we just don't think about it because it's so fundamental. It's just like, you know, again.
Are ever people thinking about it? Do you think?
They don't have to think about it until they get to a point where where the patterns are becoming either so complicated or so erratic that they have to find some other way to organize a train of thought. But for most of us, playing rhythms that we know, you know, our natural sense of pattern is what gets us there. That's why when we get a tempo is a dangerous word, but we get a rate of something happening. We're just going to assume, either intellectually, either deliberately, or just subconsciously, that's just going to continue until it changes, and then we adjust for that. But we just, when we have to, when things change. And that frees us up to look at other things going on in the pattern. Okay, so rhythm has a pattern, and most of us relate to something called the beat. We think about the beat. Yeah. It's a word I don't use too much when I'm really teaching this stuff, not that it's perfectly good, and as long as everybody understands that we're talking about is this pulse, you know, we can use it, and we do. But there are times in more elaborate rhythm situations where we can have several different beats going on at the same time, and we have to and what the conductor does, those are called beats.
So what you were talking to me about walking and,
okay.
You know, they have this thing, somebody
Let's
can't
use the word
walk
pulse.
And they can't walk and chew gum at the same time, as you're saying you can't walk and chew gum at the same time.
If you practice, but you probably don't have to,
yeah.
Because chewing gum is an automatic process which your body handles in some little squirrely office way in the back of your brain. Yeah. And walking is handled by another, you know, you can have several patterns going on. Walking and chewing gum is actually a pretty good thing to invoke, because if you take the chewing gum process and the walking down the street and think of them as one activity, you have two different rates going on. You're probably not walking and chewing in sync with your footsteps. You could, but you probably don't.
So you've already
because it just goes on automatic pilot, but they're still happening at the same time.
So you could have your bass drum and your hi-hat. Still,
you can have your bass drum. You can have your bass drum, and in fact, you're talking about drum kits are great because drummers are actually playing three-dimensional rhythm systems all the time, more than one set of subdivision, but they all relate typically to one common reference, and that's pulse, the beat, okay? But the drummer's doing more. He's maybe with his feet, he's keeping the beat, and maybe doing some sort of a pattern with it. Playing another level of subdivision on another instrument, another one with his left hand. So drummers are just like rhythm systems on their own.
You've taken this right down to its most basic level by getting people to actually walk.
Yes, well that's to be able to understand subdivision. We can talk about it. To be able to know subdivision, we have to practice it accurately, because knowing is the point at which your practice has become embodied. So when you want to play, that's where it needs to be. You don't want to be like analyzing your playing while you're playing. Just when a singer is singing a song that she knows really, really well, she's looking at almost entirely in the sensory realm. Although really singers that sing all the time at a professional level, whatever that means, you know, really high practice, let's say, you're really good at it. You got really good at it because you love it, you did it over and over and over again, and you're actually invoking all that experience, all that technical experience in a performance. And you can do it because you've done all the little steps so many times.
In the same way that you're walking down the street and you don't think about it.
Yeah. I get a lot of my ideas about practice and pattern and learning and knowing from sports medicine more than musical.
Right.
Yeah. I look at athletic coaches. I look at the way like Olympic athletes train.
Right. And what is it about that?
Well, for one thing, because their technique, at that level of performance, their technique makes the difference between whether they win a race or whether they come in third.
Yep.
You know, after a lifetime of effort. So it's really important to understand, how did the guys that got in the first 2 or 3 win, place, and show, how did they get there? Well, let's take just like a distance runner. At that level, they're working with a coach who's been through all this earlier in his lifetime. He's bringing all his experience. They're watching films. They're looking at micro changes in motion, which then the runner has to look at the film, identify that, yeah, that's something I'm doing that I didn't really realize. And if I stop wobbling my ankle just that much, that gives me just another shred of more efficiency.
Rhythm is really a very physical thing then.
Well, playing is physical. Making music is physical. Singing a song is physical. Having a conversation is physical. Especially when it's really important to be understood. Your whole consciousness. You know, not that's just talking, but having something important to say that has to be communicated. That's invoking everything that you already know to try to help somebody else.
So that's you at the point, that's the runner at the point where they're competing in that big race, that's the big performance, that's the,
But what we get is, well, going back to that analogy, once the runner and his coach identify a behavior that we can maybe get a micro improvement, and even if that's like 10 yards over 20 minutes, that makes you the difference between the winner and the guy that comes in third. Yeah. So once they identify that, then they have to go back and figure out, how do I change my practice, my training, if you will, to where that becomes automatic? Because I can't be thinking about this when I'm running. When you're running the race, you're thinking about all kinds of other things like stamina and when to exert 100% energy and when to reserve some. And
is that how you feel in a performance, do you think?
Yeah, musicians have to do that too. If you're like, let's say you're, I don't know, you're a cellist, so you're playing a Rachmaninoff, a Second Symphony, and you've got like a part that goes da 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 for like 15 minutes while other amazing things happen. You know, you can like check out, or you can, to stay in, it takes a tremendous amount of concentration. So, what we understand about the situation tells us what we need to do to get our practice consistent. And the practice has to be consistent because of pattern. You know, as soon if we're consistent with our practice, we're establishing patterns which you can't really explain. They're physiological. There's this understanding of, we were talking about 2-bit subdivision. If we divide that in half again, we got 4 bits. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.